This podcast may contain themes that are not appropriate for younger ears. Sorry, kiddos. Listener discretion is advised.
As a culture, we've become fairly obsessed with true crime content. Whether it's a podcast, streaming series, documentary, or adaptation, it begs the question if we've lost sight of the fact that the victims are actual people with families and their own stories to tell. Can consuming these things in heavy doses verge on irresponsibility? And who are we as a culture if we overly inundate the airwaves with gruesome content? In some ways, we've normalized it. So how do we approach our obsession with true crime? So you can count on the fact that this is going to be a killer episode. I'm your host, Matt, and this is the Going There podcast.
Let's go for a ride on the dark side. Let's go for a ride on the dark side. Let's go for a ride on the dark side. Let's go for a ride.
Spoiler alert, things are about to get messy, 'cause we're going there. Taboo topics are back on the table.
All right, so before we cut into the meat of this, pun intended, let's introduce our panel for today's podcast. We have such an awesome conversation ahead of us, and we will start with our returning resident psychologist, Mandy.
Hi, I'm Mandy Kirsch. I am a counselor and at a private practice, and I mostly work with teens, adults, sometimes kids a little bit more often now, but yeah, that's what I've been doing.
For sake of this episode, how many people have you murdered?
As of today, none, but we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, we'll see how the conversation goes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Lindsay. I'm producer of the podcast, and I'm an avid true crime fan.
And what does your shirt say? Because the viewer might not be able to see the whole thing.
I can do a little stand-up.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy isn't hot, in case you didn't know.
Ted Bundy.
So if that is your opinion.
Ted Bundy isn't hot. We'll get into that. But somebody who is hot online and has been on Oxygen, he's written some books, he's done tons of stuff here locally in the journalism field of Cleveland. Our featured guest of this episode, Mr. James Renner. Thanks for being here.
That's me. I'm James Renner. Hi. Hey, so I'm a journalist. I'm a true crime author. Whatever you need me to be.
If you're in the true crime space, you know who he is, actually, already. There's a book of his right there. He gifted it to us. We read it. We actually got to listen to it. But
no refunds.
No refunds. It was free, and we're still going to ask for our money back. No. And so James, actually, I knew of James years ago before he became notorious locally. Because we went to the same college, we knew a lot of the same people, and I went to the journalism school a few years behind him, and he was in that last generation of true journalists before everything started to become, well, I'm going to be a filmmaker, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do all these things that don't make sense.
Yeah, I got into the industry at the exact wrong time.
Yeah.
I got to watch it die.
Yeah. Yeah, you got,
sad.
you started dating a girl who's stage 4 cancer. Is basically what happened.
Really. I totally was born in the wrong time. I wish I was in the 70s where Cleveland still had 3 daily newspapers competing and all the reporters were out there getting the scoop. But I was working at Cleveland Scene when the housing market collapsed in 2008. And we went from a staff of 15 down to a staff of 3 over the course of 3 years.
In your book, you talk about kind of what ended up losing your job at Scene, which is a hilarious story the way it ends. But you self-admitted that you look at yourself as a gonzo journalist. But I think, especially right now where we're at, which we had no idea even 5 years ago we'd be here, but facts and truth matter, and ruffling people's feathers. I mean, you were essentially exposing a local politician who had been doing some awful things.
Well, this, like any good journalism story, this goes back to who you know. And I do a lot of my writing at the Nervous Dog coffee shop in West Akron. How does this all tie together? I'll tell you. One day you get tips out of nowhere from the strangest places. And one day my barista I was getting the coffee, and she leans over. She says, "You're that reporter from Scene, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I have a story for you." And she told me the story about how she knew that this guy that was running for governor of the state of Ohio was having an affair, and he was using campaign finances to put his mistress up in local hotels, which is illegal and a big no-no. And that was the beginning of this trip where I spent several months getting the public documents, and I had them set. And we were able to prove that his campaign finances, there was a deduction here the same day that he put his mistress up in this hotel. And we had the roommate on record saying he could hear them having sex in the next room, which was only relevant because he was a hardcore conservative family values man.
And isn't that always the case?
Yeah.
It's like, we need to put families first. None of this sex and these gay people ruining the society. But by the way,
yeah,
Right.
He wanted. In fact, he was the guy that he tried to make a special license plate. You know how in Ohio you have license plates for DUIs?
yeah.
He wanted to make a special license plate for sex offenders. And and it's he's not committing an offense. It's all consensual, but he's banging this girl. And what was wrong was he was using campaign finance to fund it. And so we had him, and I wrote this article, and the editor approved it, and the publisher approved it, but we had just been bought out by a conglomerate out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. So I was working for a paper company out of Scranton, PA.
That's you,
My
Michael
eyes just
Scott.
lit.
Do the
My
mug.
eyes lit up like Scranton Paper Company.
And the guy that ran the company was a Silver Spoon guy who never really had to do much work on his own, and he was a big-time Republican, and he realized that I was taking down this guy that was running for governor as a Republican in Ohio, and he killed it. He spiked it. So I said, maybe you shouldn't be running a paper. And he said, maybe you shouldn't be working for me. And so it went back and forth, and we're on this phone call, and I realized he's really going to fire me. And I said, could I just say one more thing in my defense? And we're on with his lawyers and his whole staff on the other end. And he's like, yes. And I said, go fuck yourself. And I hung up, and I knew I had about 5 minutes before security was going to escort me out of the building. So I'm like at my desk putting my Rolodex and like the employee manual into my anything that could be important. I'm put and by the
files.
Exactly right, deleting emails. Yeah, and so. And then, sure enough, 5 minutes later, security comes and escorts me out. I did end up suing Scene for wrongful termination, and that happened. You know, and eventually it went away, and I didn't have to work for a little bit. So
You see that happen all the time. That's often a trope in like journalism films and stuff where it's like somebody powerful is trying to kill, but it's not like it's because it actually does happen all the time because, and like you said, you were at the tail end of that era of print journalism and newspapers. They used to live so like blissfully ignorant in the fact that we can tell the stories we need to tell and we can tell the truth, and then they realized that the advertisers had them over a barrel. And now it's a totally different industry.
I was already on my way out. I knew, so I figured I might as well go out in a blaze of glory type of thing.
You had a reputation at Kent State, but it's probably a similar reputation that I had. It was kind of like he ruffles feathers and he's kind of an ass, but he's really good. He's really smart, and actually I like him a lot. So the people who the thing is, you pissed off some people, but they all respected you, and that's the most.
We get our work done.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, honestly, that's good. So I knew of you, and you and I met years later, and I've followed everything that you've been doing, the exploits. Those of you who aren't familiar with him, you may have recognized him if you watched the Maura Murray case docuseries on the Oxygen Network. Putting a pin in that, high level, what we're talking about here today is true crime, and the American especially, but culturally, we have an obsession, almost an addiction, like the true crime addict, to true crime. I mean, and podcasts, it's become very prevalent, as well as, docuseries. Recently, the Jeffrey Dahmer Netflix series came out. And what we want to talk about is the good and the bad and the ugly. There is good to be had, but I also think that sometimes there's a lack of responsibility or accountability on the side of some of the people who put the content out there, as well as some of the consumers. And so today we're really going to talk about that. It's nerding out, but with really smart people on a really interesting topic. For each of you, I want to ask the question, what draws you in or interests you about true crime?
So for me, I think that I love watching true crime because there's a level of comfort in knowing that people get caught. I don't know what it is about that, but it just makes me feel so much more comfortable knowing like, oh, but people do eventually get caught. Maybe not right away, but down the line, they eventually do get caught. And I think that just brings me some form of like calm.
Is it the justice element, or is it the everything's going to be okay element?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I was watching Law & Order SVU, and I love that show. That's one of my favorite shows. And someone was like, oh, so you like watching people get raped? And I'm like, no. I like watching people get caught. Yeah, it's a big jump. And I was like, no, I like knowing that people get caught. I like the drama, the justice. I like knowing that there usually is an end resolve to it.
Did you read that locally it came under a lot of scrutiny because it paints a very unrealistic picture of the police force?
Absolutely.
Because like you said, the people get caught, the crimes get solved, especially when it comes to like rape and abuse.
Yeah. It's not actually, it doesn't always happen that way. And I know that.
It very much doesn't happen that way. But I see what you're saying. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lindsay?
I don't know. Part of me thinks that I just like weird things, but I think that what really draws me into true crime is the psychology of it all, right? Like, I'm a curious person. There are things that I really don't understand, like math, but math isn't like super interesting to me. But the way that like a killer's mind would work, or someone who would do these things, I don't understand it. So I kind of just can't get enough information about it to see like, when will it ever compute? And I don't think it will. It's just, I don't know, like living through and trying to figure out the mystery behind it all. Anytime a new case comes out, I'm just like into it. So I don't know. I think I am addicted. I really am. But
yeah, and I've said this before. If I ever go missing, obviously the partner is always the first person you suspect, but the person who's studied serial killers so intently.
She knows where to bury the bodies.
Yeah.
No.
I'm going to know who did it.
Yeah.
She'll probably be smart enough where they don't even realize I'm missing. Like they just dress up Tyler as Matt for the rest of his life and no one ever asks any questions. Did you get into it because of just journalistic curiosity, or do you have a specific passion for, did you already have a specific passion for true crime?
You know, I honestly think if Amy Mihalovic hadn't been abducted, I probably would be doing something very different with my life. It's when I was 11 years old, this girl, she and I were born in 1978, same age. She lived in Bay Village, Ohio. And if you're not from around here, Bay Village is kind of the ritzy community on the west side of Cleveland. Safe little community where lawyers and doctors and FBI agents raise their families. And October 27th, 1989, she was abducted from a plaza across the street from the police station in broad daylight. And my mother was living in Rocky River, which is literally across the tracks from Bay Village. When I'd visit my mother on the weekends, I'd ride my bike around and I'd see Amy's poster on all the telephone poles. And my first thought was, hey, if she was in my class back at school, I'd be writing notes to her. What happened to her? Where is she? And in my mind, in 1989, if you wanted to find the most people, you would go to the mall. And so people went to the malls. And this was before eBay and Amazon and online and the internet and everything. And so I would go to Westgate Mall in my little Huffy 2-speed bike, and I'd sit out in front of Walden Books and I'd look through the crowds. I was looking for her because I didn't think it was possible she was dead. And I was looking for her abductor, and there were composite sketches that they put in the papers that I kind of recognized or remembered. And if I saw a guy that looked like the composite sketch, I would follow him out to his car, write down the license plate number, and then come in and call in the tip from the payphone in front of Aladdin's arcade. But the only number I knew by heart as an 11-year-old that had anything to do with police was 876-5353, which was the toll-free number for unsolved mysteries. So somewhere Robert Stack was getting all these tips.
Answering the phone
from this kid in Ohio. And that case stuck with me, and then they found her body in February the next year. And to this day, nobody's been able to find out who her killer was. And when I became interested in pitching journalism, it was the first big story I pitched and my first feature in Scene, and it became my first book. And then that kind of opened the door to this bigger world of writing about true crime and all these other mysteries.
So would you say it's more of the justice angle for you, or is it solving the mystery and putting it to bed, or is
it's definitely I definitely with a case like Amy's and the cases that I gravitate towards, like Maura Murray and Lisa Pruitt, it feels like a battle of wills, like the investigator versus the journalist versus the killer, the perpetrator. And they've gotten away. They've made this giant puzzle, and if somebody could just be smart enough to figure it out, they'd get this guy. And that's why I go for the unsolved murders, because there's still these unsolved puzzles. And it's kind of, you're testing your skill against somebody that got away with it.
Wasn't that Zodiac? He kept taunting the journalists in the newspaper with all the
Yeah,
and
and then
BTK did that too. I think he was sending in some letters.
A couple of them would do that, and with Zodiac, it's interesting because they had these ciphers, and then the final cipher was just decoded last year. All these years later, somebody figured it out.
That's crazy.
And they still, they think they know who it was, but they still never. There's not
Zodiac.
Yeah.
Yeah, every year or two, somebody comes forward. They're like, "My father was the Zodiac."
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, isn't it Ted Cruz? I thought we solved this a few years ago.
No, it was Ted Cruz's dad.
Oh, Ted Cruz's dad. That's right. Excuse me. Sorry.
You called my dad the Zodiac Killer, but by the way, I'm going to try to get campaign funds for you. I'm going to campaign for you. That's called integrity, folks. So everything that you guys just discussed is the good. If we're going to talk about the good, what the good does is, to a point, is it brings awareness. I think bringing awareness is a really good and really important thing, especially as females. Obviously, it can verge on paranoia and racial profiling and all these things. But Mandy, you had shared with me that you had read a book and were looking at kind of the fear element of it, like a healthy amount of fear.
Yes. So I was reading this book a friend of mine told me about called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. And it is an excellent book for anyone who's just curious about the gift of fear and our intuition. And there's a difference between our intuition and our anxiety. And I have an example of that in that I was on my way here for one of my first podcasts, and I typed in Frame One Media, and there's a voice in my head that said, check the address. Did I check the address? No, I did not listen to my intuition. I was like, Mandy, you're overthinking this. You typed in the address, you're fine. So I drive over here, and guess where I end up? But your old studio. And
that's where they murder people now for fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, shit. No, why did I do this? And then
and that van that says free shuttle to the new studio.
Exactly. They tried to get me to go in. That one I did listen to my intuition on a little bit, but it was different than anxiety going, oh my gosh, what if you go to the wrong address? What if you do this? So your anxiety versus your intuition is so different. And that's what we need to listen to is the intuition. And he gives so many different examples of that. But one of the main things that he was saying is that a lot of times we downplay our intuition, like I did on my way here that one day, where it's like, oh, I should have known later on, or oh, I should have listened to this, or oh, I'm just being paranoid, but really we should be listening to that intuition. The other thing that I was reading about too was that it isn't usually people that are trying to get you to, like, it's not like someone's coming up with a van asking kids for candy. It's usually, hey, I'm lost, or hey, I can't find my puppy. Can you help me? And they're usually looking for people pleasers, for kids or adults or whomever that are trying to find people that are willing to just help. And there's a difference between being helpful versus being a pleaser. And so I think that that's another big piece of it, is just knowing you don't have to help everyone. It's not your job to do that. But at the same time, also, you can still be helpful by saying, hey, you know what, man, I'll call the police for you. Or for a kid, knowing, hey, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and get my dad for you, or whomever,
Right.
or my parent.
That's part of one of the, so there's a podcast called My Favorite Murder, and one of their like catchphrases is fuck politeness, because
Yes.
it was like when I believe it was Ted Bundy, when he would abduct women, he would act like he had a broken leg and he was on crutches and he couldn't like put his groceries in the car or whatever, and people would, especially women, are like, well, let me be polite, let me just, and
Well, and a woman's expected to be polite.
Exactly.
In society,
in a lot of
like,
different ways.
And so are kids, too.
Yes.
You know,
mind
like,
your elders
yeah.
and be nice to people. But they say fuck politeness, and that was one of the things that like really stuck with me, because I feel like that was something, and I'm a people pleaser. I raised my hand when you were saying that, but the being polite piece is what I think gets people in trouble, and especially when there's these like nefarious forces, you know, happening.
I have to share this quick story. This was a few years back, and Lindsay and I think I got like a late night Dairy Queen craving or something. So, and
Correct.
it's Twinsburg, Ohio, which is pretty safe, but it was still nighttime, and it was the summer, so it must have been like 9:30 or something. And we're pulling out of the parking lot, and I see this guy like slowly coming to a stop on his motorcycle in the bank parking lot next to it. And so I was like, oh, I should help that guy, because I have this like good Samaritan kind of feeling of like, you should help people. I have this constant battles. I don't want to hate people. I don't want to fear people. I want to be a source of like good and help. And so I pull up there, and Lindsay is like seething, pissed at me. And I'm like, what is her problem? I thought she was just angry because our Sundays were melting. So I was like, hey man, are you okay? And he goes, I ran out of gas. I'm on my way from somewhere. And Lindsay's like shaking her head. And I was like, well, why don't you hop in? There's a gas station right up the road. I'll take you. And man, let me tell you,
He sat right behind me. Let me tell you what.
the rest of the night
I
we
could see the
argued
smoke.
about it.
I went
Coming
like
out of your
this. I went like this. I'm
It
just
went
sitting
from
here
like
don't
angry
touch
to
me.
like a philosophical argument, and I don't think either of us was wrong. If anything, I was probably a little more wrong for putting her in that situation. But if it was just me, I still would have felt better about it. But she was so pissed, and she's like, "This is the kind of shit that gets people killed."
Correct.
And I just hate I acknowledging it and accepting it, but also like, I don't know. I hate to perpetuate that kind of fear and paranoia.
But again, you could have said, dude, we'll go and get you some gas and bring it back. Why did he have to come into our space? This person, we have no idea who they are and what their agenda is. His motorcycle could have been fine. And maybe I'm being paranoid, but I don't know. I don't trust people nowadays.
Well, because you're a true crime addict. Of course you don't.
And I think, too, there's this part of us where it's like, oh my gosh, I still want to believe that there's good in the world. And there is good in the world. I'm not here to say, like, everyone's evil. You have to watch out for every single person. But you also have to be very on edge, a little bit more hypervigilant nowadays, too.
And again, where that can tip, and we'll get into the bad here in a little bit, is to where you start being paranoid of everybody. I think there's a difference between like a healthy amount of skepticism and even, I would say, just like survival skills. And James, you talk about it several times in the book about like your son being autistic. There's a lot of people who like adult autistic, like high functioning autistic adults, where people are like, something's off with this guy, and they start profiling them because they're so afraid, because they do, this isn't normal. They're not acting a certain way. Maybe this guy's trying to mow his lawn in the middle of the night or something,
Whereas the real bad guys are very good at masking,
Exactly.
and mirroring, and not looking like the strange ones in the situation. It's really hard to find that. But I do think that in general, and having this this has essentially been my career for the last like 15 years at least. I think most people are still good. you know?
Yeah.
And if they weren't, then those old routines wouldn't work on anybody anymore. You know, the guy asking for gas because his motorcycle ran, you would have had too many experiences with bad people. But generally, people are good. But, you know, it's when you're wrong in that 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, you know, case, then you're dead. So.
But then you think of the victims who were like who was I talking to? I was talking to somebody and they said that their friend was talking about going to a small gay bar somewhere. And this very attractive man kept coming up and like saying, hey, and like hitting on them. And it was like weeks later, they heard about the arrest of Dahmer. And it was Dahmer who kept coming up to this guy. And again, it's like, I don't know how he was like in the wild, but like someone who seems to be normal and like in a typical thing that you're just like saying, hey, you're hitting on someone at a bar. Those poor victims, you know, I mean, I know it's 1 in 1,000, a million, whatever, but like that still happens.
And I think the point about the instinct is very good too, because I think with people like Jeffrey Dahmer and these really inhuman people, I think they do give off a vibe that we're used to like suppressing when we see that, because we don't want to be rude or, you know, we want to treat them, you know, with respect or whatever in that situation. But there's just that red light going off in your mind. And that's, you know, on a very basic level, we're still, we only came out of the jungle, you know, not that long ago. And we'd have to be aware when there's a jaguar stalking us in the high grass, and that's what's kicking in those moments. My dad bought weed off Jeffrey Dahmer, and he said,
Get out.
No, he did, and he said it was just
That's
once,
great.
and he said I was there 5 minutes, and I knew something was off about that guy. We were never going back. He's like, even though the weed was very good.
He's like,
That was the draw.
It was the guy chewing on a human thigh that gave him away.
Right. Well, he was there with this other guy, and if you get deep into Jeffrey Dahmer's story,
And so those of you who aren't from Northeast Ohio area, Dahmer grew up and went to high school right down the road from us.
yeah.
He went to Revere, yeah.
And he hung out with, he had this friend, and there's some circumstantial evidence that suggests that the friend either knew what was going on with his first kill or what. But when the deal was going down, Dahmer and this guy were joking around. He's like, yeah, the last guy we have in the crawl space.
Oh my
The
God,
last
and it
guy
was
that
the
didn't
crawl
pay
space.
us. And there really was a guy in the crawl space.
Yeah.
But you
That's
don't want to
insane.
believe that there's really a guy in the crawl space,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't want to think that, right? And so you're like, oh, ha, you want to blow it off, but really there's a dude in the crawl space. Wow.
That's so wild. So a lot of what we're talking about is very much, especially in the fear and the instinct, female driven, because oftentimes it is, I mean, one, you have a power dynamic typically, and two, you have that societal, like, be pleasant, smile, baby. So
Exactly.
Nobody's
Just
kidnapping us.
smile.
no one,
Look at
no one wants to.
Right.
Women are, you know, they'd be easier to carry upstairs, unconscious.
Yeah.
So that's why the viewership skews largely women, I think, is because demographics of true crime, fan base, listenership, viewership is 70 to 80% women.
Sure.
Heavily white women. And we can talk about the racial skew a little bit, but it's what we found in doing some research is they're like you said, it's these stories of like survival, and they don't want to become victims. Right. And I think a lot of the women are, I mean, I don't know that you can be a woman in today's world without having been in one or two of those situations where you feel like something was really, really off. And the fact that I'm a woman played into it.
Well, I think that that's absolutely true. But then you also think about, like, how many times have you gone somewhere and seen, like, how many times has someone been like, do you have pepper spray on you? Do you have this on you? It's like everyone around you is also very fearful for you. I think that, you know, I mean, this is not really here or there. My mom is like a very afraid person in general when it comes to that stuff. But whenever I'd leave the house, are you sure you want to go out? Are you sure you should just stay home tonight? You know, is that kind of thing. Like,
Sure.
You just never know. And when I was younger, you know, most moms would be like, just be careful of your surroundings, whatever. My mom, was like, I'm 13 going to the movies with a friend by myself for the first time. Now, Mandy, when you're in the bathroom, look behind you because someone could just stab you with a needle and you'd be out on the floor, Mandy. You'd be out. And I'm like, terrified to go to the bathroom by myself.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever investigated your mother?
No. Maybe we should though. Sorry, Mom.
The other thing is in the bucket of good with the female skew is there's a lot of journalists who believe that this is actually helping create a more female-centric and feminist perspective towards true crime and media coverage, because a lot of these true crime stories are either being told from the investigator's point of view or the killer's point of view or whatever the true crime might be, but there wasn't enough focus in a lot of it on the victim. And when the victims are largely white females, now you're starting to get more and more female voices coming out of the woodwork, especially with the rise of podcasts and all of that. So there's a lot more female voices telling the story, and I think that is one of the good things that's come out of it. And also, from a journalistic standpoint, just the kind of hunger for that information has helped, in my opinion. I think it's one of the things that, like, journalism is so important, and you and I have talked about this, and it gets really muddied because our media literacy skills across the board as a country are horrible, and probably as a world because of the internet. But when you still have people who are dedicated like yourself, like you're telling a story about Maura Murray, which, by the way, the Maura Murray series played on Oxygen, and I remember saying, well, did Oxygen rebrand? Like Oxygen was...
they did right before
They
that.
really did.
But then it made sense. I'm like, oh, it's the exact same viewership. It's just they decided to stop making what South Park called investigative murder porn and actually doing like real true crime documentary series and stuff. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the Maura Murray
It was
one.
a great one.
I thought it was really well produced.
great.
What
Yeah,
do you think about it?
That was with Maggie, right?
Yeah, that was with Maggie Freeling. It was a mixed bag. It brought the case to the attention of the world, really. It was a little rough to be in it and to be, they did the classic sepia tone when they'd cut to somebody talking about me, and then they'd say, oh yeah, the dogged journalist might be our worst enemy. And then it went to the like sepia tone footage as if I was a bad guy in this whole thing. And
So ridiculous, though.
It was like an old like Columbo movie where it was like, maybe he's the killer. Like they did.
Right.
Just one more thing, Mr. Renner.
So that was a little annoying. Overall it was good. A lot of people saw that documentary series, and it certainly sold a lot of books for me.
So that's awesome. Yeah, because his book True Crime Addict is very much centered around his investigation of the Maura Murray case.
I think the biggest problem I had with the whole thing, and generally the criticism that comes with that documentary, is I called the book True Crime Addict for a reason. It's not called True Crime Fun Time.
Yeah.
It's a story that's as much about me as it is about my trying to solve Maura Murray's case. And I realized that I was going to reveal a lot of unsavory information about this young woman. And the only thing I could do that would make it fair is if I did the same thing about my own life. So I put my demons out there for people to read.
Very candidly, yeah.
And as well as hers. And I think that gets lost in the whole thing. So anyways, that's my 2 cents on the documentary.
I was curious. I obviously it was good, it was good promotion for you and the book. But yeah, even in watching, I'm like, oh man, they're kind of dogging you a little bit.
A little bit.
And you've been dogged on some podcasts and some things too.
Yeah.
But I think people have kind of taken those words back.
I think a little bit. The thing is, I've covered at this point probably 100 cases, either through podcasts or books or articles. And the Maura Murray case is the only case that I have this issue with. I get Christmas cards from Amy Mihalovik's family. I work closely with other families through our nonprofit, the Porchlight Project, which we raise money for new DNA testing and genetic genealogy for Ohio cold cases. But I remember, and I talk about this in the book, but there was a moment where I was on vacation with my family, and my wife and I had taken a walk down the boardwalk at Ocean City, in I think that's Delaware, and we're on this beautiful boardwalk, and I see this sign for a psychic, and I'm like, let's go in here. I wanna get her read on Maura Murray. And this psychic, I didn't tell her anything about who Maura Murray was or what it was. I just said, hey, I'm a journalist. I'm looking into this missing persons case. And she told us some creepy things. But the one thing she said was, why do you want to work on this case? Because you're bringing all that darkness. There's so much darkness around her, and you're bringing it back with you. And she's like, just be careful. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But she was totally true. There's so much darkness in that case, man. More than any other case I've worked. It's a case that does not want to be solved.
In watching the series and reading the book and just some of the other articles I've read on it, it's this labyrinth of things that it just does not make, like, to me, it is a Columbo movie. Everybody's a suspect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nobody is being forthcoming with information. And the people who should be the most adamant about finding her are the ones creating the biggest barricades and pitfalls for you.
Yes. And it's why, maybe the reason doesn't have anything to do with what ultimately happened to her. It really, if there's any case that's close to Maura Murray, it's a fiction case. It's Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Because she had this image as this all-American girl, but once you started peeling back the layers, it couldn't be further from the truth. And you're right, everybody had a reason to want to do her harm. At least enough people that would have given her the motivation to get the hell out of town.
Yeah.
So who knows?
And it's a real small town, hard to get to in and out of, at least where she was at.
Yeah.
And then like the friends and family, like if you have, first of all, buy the book. Where can people get the book?
Anywhere books are sold, at your local bookstore or online. If they don't have the copy in the store, tell them to order 10 copies.
Yeah.
There you go.
So definitely do that, and you should check out the docuseries on Oxygen. I'm sure you can watch it on demand or streaming. I think it's interesting, and it is one of those cases where I felt like, as a viewer who's not a huge true crime person, I'm more like white-collar crime and scandal kind of stuff. Sure. Not that I don't appreciate a good true crime story, but this one pulled me in, and it wasn't just because I'm like, oh, there's James Renner. That was part of it. And I was like, what's up with the sepia tone? But it was. I'm like, what the fuck is happening here?
Well, this is like a true mystery. That's the thing. Like, there's not a lot that are like true mysteries.
It might be something we never know the answer to, and that's, to me, as an investigator or a journalist, has to be the most frustrating part.
Unsettling.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a case where there could be any explanation so whatever you bring to it, I think, is what you ultimately decide, because it could be a murder, it could be an abduction, it could be a walk away, it could be she started a new life, walked into the woods, died of exposure to the elements, anything.
Have you ever seen Hollywoodland?
Yeah,
about George
a long time
Reeves?
ago. Yeah.
So they kind of the way the movie ends is they make it seem like this is definitely what happened. He was murdered.
Yeah,
and then it's like. And then they paint a different ending, like, actually, it could have very well been suicide. And it was kind of one of those things where it's like, whatever you want to believe, that's probably what's true. There's no way to say it's one or the other.
Yeah. The more time goes by, I'm asked what I think happened, and I'm at about 60-40.
I've asked you this before, so I'm actually very curious if it's changed.
I'm wondering myself. Yeah.
I'm
Mandy's mom picked up more.
I know. My mom is like, well, she needed to go. No.
I still think there's a chance that she's alive and well and started a new life. One of the
in Canada, right?
Well,
that's
potentially
somewhere. Before she and I go to two little bits of information that don't get reported enough. One, that before she disappeared, she called the home of a woman who investigated child abuse in the region where her family lived.
And no other reason to call this person. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean that something was happening to her. Mm-hmm. It could mean that she was aware of some situation and had this contact in that world, because what I came to learn, and I didn't believe this at first, but there is a network of people especially in New England, that help abused women. Whether they're abused by their boyfriend or, other people, and they will help them hide.
It's a new underground.
Yes. And they are better at it than the Witness Protection Agency.
Really?
Yes.
There's secret vans. There's all sorts of stuff.
They'll
There's
give
like a
them-
whole.
Was this person she called involved with that group?
She would know that group.
Okay.
I haven't been able to make that direct connection, but I was called by a member of the group that helps these women disappear. And this is a woman who has lent her Social Security out to some women to help them do this.
Wow.
And go to Canada and places like this. And she called me because she fully believed that Maura took advantage of that system in order to disappear. So I still hold out hope that that's the answer. More and more as time goes by, I'm beginning to believe that she is no longer alive. And that's the other. So she's either alive and did it herself, disappeared, or she was murdered. But if she was murdered, it was by somebody she knew.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Which is typically what the case is anyway,
Yeah.
right? But there's so many like red herrings in there, because there's like why was somebody plugging up the exhaust pipe?
tailpipe, yeah.
And there's all these weird elements.
And the bus driver who passed away.
Yeah, there's just
and-
so many things that are about it where it's like, if she did, all these things don't add up. And so I can only imagine, like, I'm just looking through it, trying to solve like a Hunter killer at home, going like, oh, who did this? But like actually having to do the work to pull up that information, to research the things, to find all that out, has got to be so frustrating, where it's like, this piece does not belong in this puzzle. Why is
Yeah.
it even here on the table?
It's one of the reasons it's so difficult is these pieces they contradict each other, and the reason they do is because from the very beginning people were lying. And
right.
so some of this evidence that we've taken as cold hard fact is made up. That's the only explanation for it, because the pieces don't fit, and the only reason they wouldn't fit is if somebody's lying about a big part of it. So we're missing some big piece there. And one day, I really think one day we'll wake up and we'll see breaking on the news that she came forward or to tell her story, or they found a body. But if there's a body, it's nowhere near where she disappeared.
Right.
Because
Because they searched that thing high and low.
Oh, yeah. Several times.
I still love you. I still love you.
One healthy obsession that's always okay to have is music, and this podcast doles it out to you every week. The musician spotlight for this episode is on the River Dragon, a New Orleans-based all-original rock band. Mixing heavy blues rock with a punk rock sense of urgency and brevity, they're veterans of the New Orleans rock scene and tireless champions of the working class. You can find them on all the streamers. Check out their socials and content on Linktree at The River Dragon.
I still want you in my heart. I still want you in my heart. And this piece of shit keeps breaking me apart.
You do hold out hope, because part of it is shining a light on it. Again, it's a double-edged sword, but when you look at something like John Walsh, the guy who started America's Most Wanted, his son was kidnapped, and then I think it was 2 weeks later, they found his severed head, which is...
Is that true?
Yeah, which is horrifying. And so this guy who could have just destroyed him, he was like, fuck this, I'm going to start finding these people.
Turned it into a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And America's Most Wanted, what I like about it is, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, America's Most Wanted to me was like good true crime, because it didn't sensationalize things. It gave you facts and evidence and a little bit of theory, but it was very much based in like journalistic integrity married with good law enforcement. To me, that's the good. Up and Vanished is one of the ones.
Yeah, so are you familiar with Payne Lindsay?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so Payne Lindsay's a podcaster. Not sure a journalist, sorry, Payne. But started a series, Up and Banished, to investigate the murder of Tara Grinstead, who was a beauty queen, I believe, out of Georgia. And really, it was kind of like a week-by-week, real-time investigation, and it actually led to an arrest and, I believe, eventual conviction of Bo Dukes as part of the murder. So
Those Duke boys.
Yeah.
no, but I mean that's the cool part about it, I think. And then there's been like subsequent ones and other, folks trying to do cold case investigations. And, there were some other ones. There's one, I think, To Live and Die in LA. There was, I can't remember what her name was, Adea Shabani, I think. And they were trying to, I think that was another Payne Lindsay one. But they were trying to see if there was anyone who had any information about it. So
So that's a slippery slope, and James, you can talk to this specifically. What do you call your group of people who send you information from the inner tubes?
They're my irregulars.
The irregulars.
I like that.
Tell us about your irregulars.
Well, with these cold cases, beginning with Mihalovic case, I would build a blog, a website around the case, and I would, as I gathered information, share that information with the world. And what that did was, it's promoting the case, it's telling people about this case, but also it eventually turns the website into a lightning rod for information. So anybody that's sitting there, let's say they knew Maura Murray. They would eventually Google, okay, let me see how that case is going. And then the blog would pop up and they, he's looking for information. Let me reach out to him and tell him what I know. And so that's how I was able to gather a lot of sources for this. And, I'd call these people that would send information or, go look for information, the irregulars, because, that's what Sherlock Holmes called his, the little ruffian kids that would run around and gather information from around London. So that's where that comes from. But it was very helpful. Unfortunately, that I started that process around 2006. It started getting out of hand, I would say, when true crime blew up, like around when Serial came out. And it brought just this influx of this wave of people, and there was so much hate and discontent around it. And it started generating, and I would notice this in comments on the website, just hate. And eventually I had to remove the comments, shut down the comments, and then I shut down the website back in 2000, or earlier, I think June of this year. Finally, and I don't think I'm going to do it for the future books. Yeah. It's kind of gotten out of hand.
You get the hate, yeah, and there were obviously a lot of people who would, people have nothing to do with it who buy into one storyline. Oh, this guy's harassing her family and won't leave them alone. But I'm sure you also...
And because they heard it on the internet, it must be true. So they dive in.
Again, back to the journalistic integrity and media literacy. But also, then you get all these people who maybe mean well or just aren't thinking it through. Everybody thinks they have information to give, and really, they just want to be a part of it. Yeah. And so you get people who, that's a big thing in the bad column, is you get people who then start making false accusations or incorrect accusations. Like, I know exactly who killed Maura Murray, which you guys got that multiple times, right?
Yeah. And again, we're looking at this in hindsight. But so when I was running the blog for Maura Murray back in 2011, 2012, about 10 years ago, wow. I was looking at the website and blog as a writer's room at Scene or any newspaper where you could go in and you could throw out ideas on possible suspects. And under the understanding that people would be able to read this and understand that we're just kicking around ideas. Just because somebody's mentioned in a post doesn't make them guilty of anything. And I did not account for the average intelligence of the average internet user. George Carlin has a great saying where think about how stupid the average person is, and then realize that half of society is stupider than that. And so people couldn't make that separation. They saw it, and if it was written on the blog, they'd think, oh my God, that guy's a suspect. It's like, no, guys.
Yeah.
So that's why I had to pull back on all that. So you can't have intelligent discourse on the internet, as we know now.
And part of what happened during the Maura Murray series is they tried to paint you as just like, here's just this guy who's interested, instead of like an actual acclaimed journalist. Here's this guy who's doing it. And one of the other things that we've seen happen, especially in recent years because of the internet, is these armchair detectives who want to get involved and actually cause more problems than trying to move the ball forward. We saw a real small piece of that in the second season of Tiger King, where the detectives were like, we're on this, like, just shut the fuck up and stay out of the way. And I'm not saying that people should not, if you have information or if you think you know something, you should obviously come forward. But a lot of these internet sleuths are trying to figure things out. The case of the hotel in Hollywood, where the girl they found the girl
Elisa Lam.
Elisa Lam.
Yeah.
I was so creeped out, and when that series came out, I was actually so bummed by the end because I really thought it was something supernatural or a devil's, like a Satanist cult or something, and it just turned out that it was
The
armchair
Cecil
detectives.
Hotel. The Cecil
Hotel.
Yes.
It was just armchair detectives who put that clickbait in there to begin with, grabbed our attention, showed us
With
all
the
of these things
elevator.
without all of the facts.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the bad things that comes out of it is you do have a lot of people who think they're journalists because the term research has been very much misappropriated by a lot of, like you said, the dumber, even dumber half of America. People are like, oh, I did research. Like, bro.
Wikipedia?
They're probably looking at the Spitball Brainstorm blog. And like you said, there's a difference between, like, we have a hard time deciphering the average American. What's fact, what's opinion, what's satire.
Yeah.
I mean, our own president
satire
retweeted
doesn't work anymore.
The Onion, like, here's facts. So, satire, it's hard to satire what's happening. You can't parody
a parody.
Yeah. You can't make Idiocracy the parody.
Yeah.
Well, and it does remind me of like the Gabby Petito case, though, where a lot of people like on TikTok were like, look, I saw her van. And like it actually was helpful in that manner. So it was like there were a couple times, but then it's like, why are you posting this on TikTok? Like that's where I get frustrated.
And why are you telling us? Why aren't you going to the cops?
Exactly. And they may have, but then also wanted to boost their TikTok viewing, which was bothersome to me. Like
that's
this
what
is
I mean,
a person's, livelihood potentially. Well, it wasn't, but but it could have potentially been her livelihood. And you're posting this on TikTok and YouTube. Like that's not okay in my mind. In my mind, it's like, exactly, give it to the cops, which they could have. But at the same time, do you know what you're doing to this case by putting it on, of all places, TikTok?
So here's my thesis on this whole topic. I think there's a big difference between something like the Maura Murray, well, maybe a more ideal version of the Maura Murray docuseries, and on the other end of the spectrum is like the Zac Efron, Ted Bundy. Especially when it's something that's still in like recent time. Like if somebody does something like the Zodiac thing, I think enough time had passed where it was still interesting because a lot of people didn't know about it. But there's been several documentaries on Dahmer and Ted Bundy and all of these guys. And when you're like, my first question, like Lindsay's like, you're going to watch a Dahmer thing, right? And I'm like, no. She's like, why? I'm like, because I already know the story and there's already a really good documentary on it. What are they adding to it? They're sensationalizing it. And my problem with it is we're talking about the benefits of being aware and watching true crime series and listening to podcasts. They did a study, and this was actually a little disconcerting. The lowest percentage, they asked, like, why do you watch it? What interests you in the genre? And the very lowest percent for both, for women and it was the second lowest for men at 31% was informational value. That was actually the lowest. The highest one is mystery and intrigue, and then it goes psychological, good storytelling, curiosity, blah, blah, blah. So it goes down there, but the actual information is the lowest. And so my question is, at the end of the day, if you're going to produce something that's true crime, I'm not talking SVU.
No, I got
or,
you, yeah.
I'm
like
not talking
like a retold,
yeah,
like remake
an actual
of it.
story
Sure.
with actual people and actual victims and consequences. Are you making it first and foremost for information, or are you making it first and foremost for entertainment? And if it's being made for entertainment, I think that's the wrong answer. I'm not talking Jack the Ripper. I'm talking Gabby Petito, which they've already greenlit.
Thora Birch, I think, directed
with Thora
it.
Birch.
Yeah.
It's going to
That's
be
very
I think it was
strange.
Lifetime or something.
Why,
Yeah, I know.
Why is Thora Birch a part of this?
I was
That's
not-
very odd.
Yeah.
Hocus Pocus 2. She's pissed. She's
Right.
like, I'll show you
She's like,
then.
fine.
You're not going to put me in that movie? The Gabby Petito story coming to Disney Plus.
Right, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked.
It's
but
a musical.
Oh, gosh.
It's a little sad, but I think that's true. I think people want. I respect the mystery and intrigue. I've always said stay curious, but the fact that the information was at the bottom. So I question the motives of people, especially because we know the entertainment industry is all about the dollar. When something like the recent Dahmer series comes out on Netflix, while I haven't seen it, so I can't sit there and bash it, I'm just like, why does there need to be a dramatized series of it? Because anytime that you take, even I don't care how historically accurate you try to get, and we talked about this in like which films are offensive and stuff. When it comes to historical things, you have to pad things and make things up. You have to be able to fill those gaps in between the scenes, and oftentimes. I don't know if the average person knows this, but when it says based on a true story, that can mean like it's 2% true.
Sure.
That can mean like there was once a guy who lived in this town named Bill, and that was it.
I think what would help is if people would get better at understanding what's journalism and what's entertainment. And it's been very mixed up in the podcast world, where you look at the top 10 true crime podcasts for any given week, and you've got Dateline on there, sure, but the remainder 8 or 9 are done not by journalists, but by entertainers, people that used to perform on Broadway or had their own series on TV. And that's fine. That serves its own thing. If you like that, fine. But where it gets all muddy and where it's getting mixed up is now there's this backlash, as there should have been, from some of these victims who say, well, you've taken over my story and you're just doing it to sensationalize and to make money. And it's like, yeah, some people are doing that, but not the journalists. We could care less about the money part of this, and likely we're not making as much as you think we are. And we're certainly not doing this for the money, because there's a lot easier ways for us to earn that money, especially at the corner of Arlington and Exchange at any given night. So that makes me a little angry when that happens, or just disappointed, I guess, more than angry, is when they they lump us all in together. It's disappointing.
Because your average person doesn't know what an actual journalist is. They think journalist means somebody who produces a piece either for print or on TikTok or whatever, and that's just not what it is.
Or clickbait articles on BuzzFeed.
Right. There's a whole series of this woman, Bailey Sarian. She does makeup and murder.
Yeah.
And she literally does her makeup while she's telling stories.
Yes.
And I love watching it. It's like one of my, because she does excellent
How
makeup.
does that go well together?
It doesn't.
Because somehow it works.
It feeds to the female population.
Sure.
It's like pineapple
I
on
like
pizza.
one or the
I just
other.
don't
It's
get
like
it.
it's like I love watching people do makeup tutorials, and I also love hearing murder mysteries. So, oh my gosh, she put those together, and whew, she just had a total fan, right?
Is she?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this:
Yeah.
Is she hot?
Of course she is. Yeah, of course she's hot.
That's
Yeah.
why she's.
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
sorry. That's
Yeah.
why. That's the
She's
main
beautiful.
reason she's
I mean,
popular.
Yeah.
As a guy, what could I do also? Like not makeup
Start
and
doing
true
your
crime.
makeup.
Words
No.
of affirmation.
Your nails.
You look so nice today.
Yeah.
You are just so special. So Maura Murray was murdered.
Yeah.
I'll try that. Give it a try.
Well, and I think part of it too is like there's this part of it where we're also glad we're not the victim. You know what
Sure.
I mean? And I think that that's a big part of like where it kind of comes back around to it of like, we're just glad we're not on
Yeah.
that spectrum.
They're,
And,
but
yeah.
for the grace of God type of thing.
Yeah.
I saw that with Gabby Petito.
Yes, because it could have been anyone, right?
And
I mean,
I think it was a very, I'm sure there's going to be papers written about the psychological effects of that case and how it was all playing out in real time.
Right.
And we had all these photographs that we could, look at because she was an influencer,
Right.
Gabby was. And then, there was part of that like, well, this could have happened to me or I would have done this different.
well, and that goes to like why the bad of it is like a lot of people want to victim blame and go, well, that wouldn't have happened to me. I would have done this. I would have
Right.
done that. You don't know that.
Right.
Well, or you're like even with Maura, I'm sure there was still like I want to rescue her. She was so,
I never had that.
Well,
but there's
not
definitely.
not you, but like just from a viewership
Oh yeah,
standpoint.
it still exists.
Yeah.
She's frozen in time as a 20 as an attractive 22-year-old young woman. And yes, absolutely. There was one guy who was very closely associated with the family and helping them out with like computers and web stuff and everything. And he got caught on the anniversary of the abduction. This was so creepy. And the FBI were monitoring the websites that were being visited by computers in his house. And this computer was going onto my website and refreshing it like every 5 minutes and also downloading child porn.
Wow.
So what are you doing with pictures of Maura Murray open on your computer while you're downloading this other stuff? And you can't tell me that something sexually charged isn't going through that
ick
person's mind.
comes up. The ick factor is
Well,
definitely there
right.
with that one. Like,
Well, and it's from the
why?
victim side as well as like the other thing that's really problematic is that Zac Efron was cast as Bundy.
Right.
The
He was a
Dahmer-
very attractive young actor.
Ted Bundy
Yes.
is not hot.
And Ted
No.
Bundy's not hot.
No.
You guys know this
Right.
already. But even with like the Dahmer series that just came out, like he is portrayed in a very sexual way, which yes, that was a huge thing in the case, but like we're almost capitalizing on that and we're sexualizing these serial killers. And then we're seeing like, and we know this, right? Like Bundy got married to someone who was pretty much a fan or like more that I think he worked with her or something, but like after he got arrested for everything, and then Dahmer started getting all this fan mail, like these serial killers, they get these fans and like people getting really excited about it, and it's just like sexualizing and glorifying these people, and it's so problematic. And if we have that in the media and we perpetuate that, how are we stopping that from happening again? As we continue.
So there's a couple of issues going on. Like obviously there's this kind of like, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. We kind of canonize and put the victims into this sainthood.
Oh, exactly.
Or,
yes,
or
that's
almost
definitely going
martyrdom.
on. Yes.
But it's especially because they're typically white females and the guys who were taught like you need to be the hero, the savior role. On the flip side of that, you have women who lust after the serial killers. And it got me thinking, and I did a little bit of research about like, I knew the skew was going to be white women. I think there's two issues that are at play here that, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about. One, you have, I think because your average white woman in America already feels a little bit safe at home. So the idea is like some of that intrigue and mystery and not so much the I need to learn, but like that won't happen to me.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Like I live in a good place where your average person who didn't grow up in a white middle class house might already feel like that's outside the door.
Yeah,
and they're
right.
like, I'm not looking into this shit. I don't want to watch
Right.
it. Like I already got this going on over here. But also the other problem with the racial skew of true crime is there's a lot of non-white crime that happens and missing people and murders that doesn't get covered and it doesn't get it gets
get the
ignored.
same
It doesn't get the same
attention.
kind of attention.
It's undocumented. It's not really unreported. I mean, there's so many pieces to that.
Yeah,
really.
and had Dahmer not been a cannibal because most of his victims were people of color, they were male, would he have been as notorious?
Right.
Because the cannibalism was so sensationalized.
Especially gay people of color. So you had
Correct.
you had this group that they already saw as kind of like in America if a minority gets killed, it's like, oh yeah, I mean that's just our world. And then when a white girl, especially a pretty white girl, goes missing or gets killed, they're like, everybody stop what you're doing. Everybody grab somebody's hand and we're going to do a walk down Main Street.
It's a big part of the Gabby Petito case, actually. They were like, oh my gosh, another, young white girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, whatever. And then I think there was something going on around, I can't remember if it was like Facebook or Instagram, where they were like trying to post more of women in a different minority of just, can we focus on this woman too? Can we please focus on this woman as well? Because why, again, are we sensationalizing, not that she didn't deserve attention, she did, but also what about these other women who go missing all of the time?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think Indigenous women are the ones that are the most
Yeah.
forgotten about.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that was a bizarre like B story of the or the new season of Dexter, which was not as good as the
New
original
Blood,
show.
yeah.
But he was, they were in a part of like upstate New York or something, and it was like the Native American women who had disappeared and they couldn't figure it out. And that was an interesting arc because I was like, I had never really thought about that. James, I know I set a beacon up when I talked about
The religion?
putting the the religion of this person's dead. So not only do we not speak ill of the dead, but we will now pray to them. We will now
It definitely, it becomes a religion, and not just like figuratively. It becomes a little religion, because what you do is you find this young woman who's missing or was murdered, and they do become saintly. You can't say anything bad about them, or you're a heretic. And then there's this added thing where once a week they have to go on and profess their devotion to this case, their love for this person that they never knew, that they don't know anything about really. And it becomes like that weekly a weekly church service. They go on, and sometimes you'll have podcasts devoted to a case where they come out weekly, so everybody gathers around and shares this communal experience. And it is a replacement for religion for some of these really big cases, for sure. And then what happens when it's the worst thing that could happen to this community is for the case to actually be solved.
Yeah, because what do you do now?
Right. What's their identity anymore? That they're not a champion for this woman that they've never met.
For a family member or close friend, I can, not the religious aspect, but I can understand, like you said, that person is a snapshot in time. They'll never age. They're always going to be that.
Yeah.
You don't have to overshare in this, and I'm sure you don't want to pick at that scab either. But what made the Maura Murray case especially interesting in your book, and then even in the series, is there was a lot of cover-up that was happening, not just for people, their self-protection, but trying to paint Maura as this living saint. And then the more they started, she was drunk, she was stealing money, and you're like, okay. And not that it makes her a bad person, but it makes her a human. Are we trying to find a human, or are we trying to find the Messiah?
Yeah, I got a lot of flack for one particular part of the book where I talk about how she had hooked up with a number of young men that were involved in the track team. And,
a college girl having sex with multiple men?
Right?
I never.
That is just...
I'll clutch
Where are
my
my
pearls.
Right, exactly. Pearl clutching.
Oh, my.
But, so they're like, and they'll turn it into, you're so obsessed with the sex life of this young woman you never met. I could care less. We all had fun in college. That's not the point. The point is
He opens the book about being at a strip club, by the way.
is true.
So, no one's trying to say he's a saint
fantastic
either.
chapter.
Right.
Yes, I've never said I was a saint. So, but the reason it's interesting is one of those young men was turned in as a suspect by his girlfriend at the time, who said, hey, you got to look into this guy that hooked up with Maura, with these other guys, before, because I think he might have had something to do with their disappearance. Now, that's very interesting. And that's a suspect we wouldn't know about if I hadn't reported on that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what ever became of that young man either, but it probably, I don't know. So, but it is a key point of that case.
And, I don't mean to keep beating the drum of the Maura Murray case, but what made so many red flags go up is this wasn't a person who was murdered necessarily. This wasn't a person whose body was found. This wasn't a person whose killer or abductor had been caught. This was an open investigation where no one had any idea. And the people closest to her, while I'm sure it was hard to see this put out in broad daylight, didn't want evidence and facts that could help with finding her to be put out. And that, to me, is like, God, there's so much, like, what we don't know is probably even bigger than what we do know.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a shame. Now, I will say that the one good thing that's happened in the last year is Maura's sister has started a TikTok, and you should go check it out because she does share information on her TikTok that is relevant to the case. Mm-hmm. And I think if that would have happened 10 years ago or the equivalent, if she had done what she's doing now, I think a lot of the trouble would not have occurred because it was the people acting on behalf of the family that were doing all the horrible things, like turning in false tips for the case and, mucking it up. So, maybe it's taken a turn for the better.
I'm wondering what's making her speak out more now, too, than before.
Well, it's a number of things. She was contacted by another victim or family member of a victim in a crime who had success on TikTok and showed her the ropes. And I think that was more the reason why it's happening now, and it's such an available new medium.
It is.
And she can control the narrative.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly right. And that's what she should be doing at this point.
That makes so much more sense. I was just like, wait, but why now? Why wasn't she talking to you more then? Or why wasn't she as more active then? But but that makes more sense the way you explained it.
Yeah, and who knows? The sister works for the Department of Defense and had a job and her own thing going on back then, and might not have been up to being as public as she is now.
That makes sense too.
That's kind of my last point that I had here was we're talking about the families and friends of the victims. One of the ugly things is like the Dahmer case. When the Netflix series came out, a lot of the victims' families, even though that they said, their intentions were to tell it from the victim's point of view, which was at least nice that they tried to do that. But, what's the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So your intentions may have been good, but these people still felt re-victimized. And that's one of the ugly things that can come out of it. And there's a big difference between an ongoing investigation where you're trying to find answers. Right. So we're clear there. James Renner, that son of a gun, that sepia-toned motherfucker.
Right. Yeah, you have to make those distinctions. You can't just lump everybody all into one category and say from now on nobody can write about or make movies about these true crime cases. But for things like Dahmer that have been solved and we know the story inside and out, what's funny is everybody's on social media saying, I can't believe they did this. But at the same time, it's now the second most popular TV series in Netflix history. So all those people, we know what you're up to.
Right.
So let me ask you, what's your personal opinion? Was it, I don't know if you saw it or not, but
I won't watch it. I can't.
Do you think it's fine if they want to make entertainment, or do you think that it muddies the water when they sensationalize stuff?
I'm a journalist. I make my living and stand by the First Amendment, but I think at this point, our founding fathers didn't understand what social media would do, and we need to regulate it in some way. And if it means, a moratorium on cases that are, there's so many victims and it was so brutal that once it's solved, there's no public interest in covering it. Sure.
That's a very, very good answer. I agree 100%. Oh. And that's why I thought that's why I separated the Zodiac film, for example, with like the Dahmer show and the Ted Bundy, Zac Efron thing. It's like, because the Zodiac still isn't 100% solved. And because it happened before there was this access to information like now, I thought it was interesting. One other one is Dead Asleep.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know this one.
Yeah, Dead Asleep, they made a documentary about it, and it was a young woman who was murdered by her friend, and the defense was that he was sleepwalking. Oh. And so when the documentary was made and released, the sister went on TikTok or social media.
Oh, I've seen her.
But definitely on TikTok
Yes.
to say, please take this off of your streaming services. And I think it was especially targeted towards Delta for their in-flight
Oh, that's
streaming.
weird.
Yeah, but she was trying to get, because I think it was released on Hulu at first, but she was actually able to get Delta to remove it because she said, we did not consent to this. We were kind of against it. Yeah. So she was really trying hard from her own social media platform perspective to get that removed because the family did not support it. On another hand, where it is supported is, have you heard of Abducted in Plain Sight, the Jan Broberg story?
I don't know if I have.
So Skye Borgman did a documentary about it. And
we met.
Via
virtually.
phone. Hi, Skye. So they actually just released a Peacock series called Friend of the Family. And Jan Broberg is I think, producer or consultant on it, and actually opened up the series. And it's a dramatization, but opened up the series like saying, this is my story.
Oh, that's smart.
So this is someone who, totally consented, was, consulted through the whole thing. And that makes me feel better watching it because if you've watched it, it's really hard to watch. Like, because we're dealing with pedophilia and little children
it's like
and
porn.
things like that.
If I know that the girl is aware that there's a camera in the room,
Consent
I feel
is everything.
I feel like it's okay.
But that's the difference. You have the victims'
over 18?
families of Dahmer's victims saying, you depicted my outburst in court in your series, and this is just despicable. Like, I never would have signed off on this. And you see them side by side, and they're almost identical.
Look, as a person who loves fiction, loves storytelling, I get that. And that's why you really have to ask, what was the point? Because you knew there was no way everyone was going to be happy with it. Unless you went around first and surveyed everybody. But there's no way. These people don't want to, they're still reeling from it. How could you ever get over the fact that it's like, not only was this person who is important to you murdered, but they were eaten by the person who had sex with them, murdered them, tortured them a little bit, and ate them. Yeah. You're never going to get over that. There's no amount of time with Mandy in therapy.
No, there's none.
That's going to solve that for you. So then why do it? But yeah, I think everything should be looked at in its own context. But I do think that you have an accountability as an audience member, as a consumer, to what it is that you consume, what your actions that you take online are. And while I'm a huge supporter of the First Amendment, I also believe that because it was created well before anything close to what we consider media today, there needs to be something the idea of anonymity, while I think privacy is really important, when you put out things in the world, like you were getting threatening videos from somebody who was threatening your family and your child and taking pictures of you.
Yeah, some creepy guy put together a bunch of pictures of my son, who was 5 years old at the time, up on YouTube, and said, with threatening, with sinister music that said, journalists should be careful of their own family reporting on others, or something like that. I've had people show up at my family's vacation house in the Outer Banks when we were there last summer, threatening us about the Maury Murray case. And so it's gotten way out of hand. You were hitting on close to another answer to this. Another thing that would help is if we want this freedom of being able to talk about anything we want online, then we should have a name to back it up, and there shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to do that anonymously.
Right.
Yes.
Like there's a difference between being able to go in a chat room or something and posting things online, because especially when it comes out where you're sharing some very concerning things and making threats, and you can say whatever you want, but you have to be okay with the consequences that follow that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you want to add as far as the good and the bad and the ugly? Is there anything you think we didn't cover?
I think that was pretty comprehensive. I think this movement to have a better way of consuming true crime is good. I just would caution not to throw the baby out with the bathwater type of thing, and realize that there's a place for real journalism that's not sensationalized. And one of the things that they want here, and I understand the thought behind it, but it can't work. Is the families are pushing to have control over the media that covers the cases. And when it's still unsolved, that's a very dangerous thing, because 9 times out of 10, when a person is murdered, it's by somebody that they know and somebody they're related to, like Scott Peterson. If we had given him the ability to have a veto power over who covered Lacey's case, he'd still be free. So that'll never happen and never should happen. But people can do it more responsibly.
Yes.
In the last presidency, there was several people in that party who were in Congress and other political seats who said things like, you shouldn't be going to the fake news for your news. When fake news started becoming a thing, you should go to your president for the news and information. Doctors take the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. Journalists is like, report the facts regardless of what they might be or how unsettling they might be or how unflattering they might be. The journalists are our last line of defense against political corruption. And the fact that
but they're so mean. They're mean to me.
It's by no mistake that journalism has been attacked and been torn down to the point where on one feed you can get CNN and Daily Beast in your and they're matched at like same amount of fact checking. I hope we have, if we don't return to a time where we have trust in journalists and we have better media literacy, I don't think there's any hope. So keep doing what you're doing.
Oh,
yes,
thanks.
please.
The only way to solve that, by the way, and this is another episode, is we need state-run media in the United States. It's the only, because what you have to do is break the connection between journalism and advertising.
Yeah.
And journalism only works in the United States because we're capitalists, because of the advertising. And the advertising and viewership is what's driving what's being reported. And you can't be unbiased. You can't report just the facts if you're dependent on what the advertisers and the viewers think they want.
And especially when they start doing the ads that are dressed up as news stories that are written by, without saying it because I don't want to get sued, we all know who the perpetrator behind that is, the big conglomerate that does that. But it happens all the time. And I don't care which way you lean. I lean left, obviously. But when I start to see things where I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, I get mad at left-leaning media outlets when you can tell that they're just...
Hunter Biden's laptop is a legitimate story.
It's a legitimate story.
I'm as left as they come. I am a Marxist, but Hunter Biden's laptop is a legitimate story, and it's enough that the most powerful man in the world, Joe Biden, is it opens him up to all sorts of bribery attempts or it's not good.
See, for you right-leaning people, the journalists are on your side. All they're trying to do is give you the facts.
Right.
And the thing is, however it pans out, if it turns out that the Democrats have been eating babies all this whole time, I want to know.
I would be the first one at Planet Pizza reporting live from the basement. If any of that were true, that'd be the biggest story ever.
No, exactly.
Good pizza, though.
To your panelists and to the audience, what is one true crime thing that is not a Renner creation that you would recommend?
I've been talking about this book a lot that I really like called Couple Found Slain. And don't let the title fool you. It's about more than that. But you pick up these true crime books, and it's usually about the mystery and the murder and the trial. This book is not that book. It's about this young man who murdered his parents when he was I think in his late teens. And then he went to the police station, turned himself in, and he did it because he was legitimately insane. If you kill your parents, you're crazy in one way or another. And so he ended up getting sent to the mental institution. Now, the story is about what happens when you've committed a terrible crime like that, but then gets sane. And he gets sane in the hospital and comes to terms with what he did and has to realize what he did. And then what do you do with that person? Now they're saying they would never do that again, but it's so horrendous that they don't want to let him out. So now he's in this weird catch-22.
God, that's so interesting. We did an episode on prison reform last season, and the big question is like, what is the prison system actually for? And almost nobody would say rehabilitation.
Right.
That's what we pretend it's for. But the fact that somebody who's actually rehabilitated, the fact that we don't know what to do with that person as a society tells you everything that's wrong with that system.
Yeah.
Where can people check you out and your blog and all the things that you're doing?
JamesRenner.com for all your James Renner needs.
Spelled just like Jeremy Renner, his cousin who played Jeffrey Dahmer in that early 2000s movie.
That's right. Yeah.
That's not his cousin, but she got so
You
excited.
had me like fooled for a second. I was like, what?
I wish. Get some of that Hawkeye money.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
JamesRenner.com. And then, my books are in the bookstores. I have 2 podcasts. I have a weekly podcast called True Crime This Week that comes out every Friday morning. And then I have a podcast I release in a season once a year called The Philosophy of Crime. That's kind of trippy. You might like.
Definitely check it out. As a fan myself, I can tell you that it is worth a listen. You get some of the snarkiness, a couple of Ted Cruz digs. It's a good listen. And you can check us out at thegoingtherepodcast.com. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Do me a favor, don't murder anybody this week. And we'll see you guys next time.
And Ted Bundy is not hot.
No.
So.
It's a little hot.
While you're at it, give us a rating, share with a friend, and subscribe. We know who killed it. Well, we know who's killing it. Our musician spotlight, The River Dragon. You can check them out and find them on all the streamers. Linktree at The River Dragon.
Just what I want, just what I need, just what I want. You've got just what I want, just what I want, just what I want. And I think you know just how I like it. Just how I like it.
This podcast is made possible by its hosts and Frame One Media in association with Joe Cali and Bobby Thomas.
Thank you.